All right, reminders of the objectives. Should be able to define soil. We have a working definition from the lab that we did. You're looking for the actual definition of soil. Then you should be able to tell the difference between physical and chemical weathering, and then also tell me how physical and chemical weathering can work together. Soil. To most people, soil is just something that is on the ground. It covers the surface of the earth in many areas, not all of them, but in many areas. And you may come across different definitions of it. When we're discussing it for science class, we're going to define it based on what it is made up of. Okay? So our definition for soil is going to be something that contains broken down rock, mineral matter, organic matter, air, and water. Okay, so you guys hit on a lot of these points. You said it should be able to hold water. It should have organic matter and nutrients in it, okay? So those minerals can often fall into that nutrient category. Okay? But the things that we were missing is it should have some form of aeration, and it should have broken down rock in it, okay? That is when we talked about the cotton balls versus the potting soil that I gave you. One of the big differences, because cotton is technically organic matter, but it doesn't have any broken down rock in it. The salt is a mineral. It's organic matter, or not organic, sorry, mineral matter, okay? But it doesn't have anything organic in it. The sand that I gave you has broken down rock in it, but it often lacks organic matter of any kind, and it doesn't hold water well. Okay. Some soils, but not all soils, can support life. You will find that if you go out to an area and you take a sample of soil and that soil is very sandy, it can still be considered soil if it has sand in it, as long as it meets all the other qualifications. But you'll find that sandy soil doesn't support life very well because, as Chris said, doesn't hold on to water very well. And it shifts around a lot, making it very difficult for plants to get a firm rooting in it. So, not all types of soil can support life. As you discussed in one of the questions on the end of your lab, what would need to be done to make these soils more productive? Which soils would be the most productive? You correctly identified the potting soil as the one that would be the most productive of the options that I gave you, and that's because it has all of these things in it. Okay? And in good amounts. It's got good amounts of nutrients and mineral matter. It's got good organic matter. It's got good broken down rock. It's well aerated. It has water in it, and it's able to hold on to that water well. Okay. Soils develop over long periods of time. Okay? You're not just going to have a concrete pad and go out the next day and all of a sudden there's a fertile field there. Okay, it takes a long time for them to develop, and they begin developing by the process of weathering. So, weathering is the process by which rocks and mineral matter are broken down into pieces, and it can happen either mechanically, or as you'll hear us describe, physically, or they can be changed chemically when they're broken down. The two different forms are going to be physical and chemical weathering. We're going to talk about physical weathering first. Physical weathering happens when rock is broken into smaller pieces, but maintains its chemical composition. So what that means is you make the pieces of rock smaller, but you don't change what type of rock it is. Still the same. Nothing about its chemical makeup changes. Anybody think of a way that this could happen? What's a way?
Rain.
Rain. Okay, water is often involved in this process.
Erosion.
Erosion is moving rock from place to place. That doesn't have to do with breaking it down.
But it can cause something else to break down.
It could. That's fair. If you have water that has lots of soil in it that's moving, it could cause other rock to break down. Okay. So, some examples we're going to talk about. Ice wedging is a popular one. You've heard this process described. You have a crack in the rock. Water fills that crack. Temperatures drop. The water freezes. Water has this unique chemical structure that causes it to expand when it freezes, so it takes up more space. And that expansion of the water pushes that rock apart, makes the crack larger. Then temperatures rise, the water melts, goes deeper into the crack, and the process repeats. And over time, chunks of rock can be broken off of structures or boulders or things like that, and the rock gets broken into smaller and smaller pieces. Plant roots can also do a process similar to this. So if you've ever seen a crack in a sidewalk that then starts to get plants growing in that crack, you'll notice that the crack widens over time. Okay? Or oftentimes you'll notice if there are trees planted too close to sidewalks, that those trees' roots can actually upheave and break the sidewalk. Okay? Sidewalk is man-made, but they can do the same thing to non-man-made rocks that occur in their paths. If their roots can get into small cracks, then as the roots grow, they force those cracks farther apart, and then that rock gets broken down. And then, as we talked about, water plays a large role here. Okay? Anytime you have flowing or moving water, that water is not usually just water. It's usually got all kinds of other things in it, and it can carry sediments across an area, and as those little pieces of rock that it's carrying dig into the rock underneath, they can break off other little pieces and weather the rock down. Next, let's talk about a little bit of chemical weathering. This happens when water, air, or any other substance reacts with the minerals in rocks and changes their chemical composition. So in this case, we're not just breaking the rock down into small pieces, we're actually changing the rock, changing substances by having a chemical reaction take place. Some examples of this: leaching of minerals to form caves. So what happens is if you have limestone caves form because water flows through an area and it actually dissolves certain minerals that are in rocks, which will chemically change those rocks and then carries some of that away, and we leave behind these large cave formations. When you have rainwater has a pH that is slightly acidic, and that acid can go through a chemical reaction with rocks and dissolve some of the minerals in those rocks and change them over time as well. There are, of course, other means of weathering than just plain chemical or plain physical. Often, physical and chemical weathering are going to work together. So it's not that you'll see just physical happening or just chemical happening, but oftentimes there's sort of like a tag team approach. For example, anytime physical weathering is going to break the rock down into smaller pieces. Anytime you break something into smaller pieces, you have a larger surface area. So think about it. If you have a large cube of rock, you have basically 6 surfaces that stuff can touch, right? If you break that cube down into hundreds of little pieces, then all of the surfaces of those pieces that were once inside the rock that couldn't get touched are now outside where they can get touched. So you have all of this surface area. And what happens then is when chemical weathering happens, it has more surface to happen on, and as a result, it can happen faster and to more pieces of rock. So they work well together. Another good example of when chemical and physical weathering work together is when you get an organism involved. For example, lichen. Lichen is a type of plant, and this specific type of plant expands and contracts as it gets more or less water. So when it has a lot of water, it expands. When it doesn't have a lot of water, it contracts. And so just like water freezing in a crack, it does the same process where it breaks apart rocks when it expands and contracts like that. But then also, lichen secretes mild acids, and those mild acids do chemical weathering to the rocks and help break the rocks down that way. There are, of course, other ways that organisms get involved in weathering, and also in just good soil formation, like earthworms help to aerate soil, right? So lots of other ways that organisms can be involved.